At 2:14 a.m., the lights plunged the Sentinel Peaks Medical Center into absolute darkness. For 4 agonizing seconds, the third floor vanished. But for Lena Tawa, a timid night nurse, something far older and deadlier returned. Would you recognize the silent rhythm of approaching danger? Lena Tawa moved through the orthopedic recovery wing on the 3rd floor of Building C like a phantom. Her shifts began precisely at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes early, always with a foil-wrapped tray of panikeke, her family's rich, sweet Samoan coconut pancakes. She'd leave slices at the nurses' station, in the break room, and at the security desk in the lobby, where Marcus, the watchman, Thorne, sat. Marcus, a former Army sergeant first class with 2 decades in uniform, watched the main entrance with an almost predatory alertness. "Evening, Marcus," Lena would whisper, her voice barely a breath. "Evening, Lena. Panikeke?" He'd noticed her in his first week, the way she cleared a room with an imperceptible scan before entering, the surgical precision of her hands, the almost preternatural calm. No one else seemed to see it. 3 years of night shifts, 3 years of hushed replies, 3 years of, "Sorry, doctor," and, "Of course, you're right." She was, as charge nurse Eleanor Vance called her to the day staff, our island girl. Adequate, unambitious, she signed her annual reviews without comment. Nobody knew. That was the point. Lena, with shoulders that spoke of quiet strength, cultivated invisibility. She hunched, tucked her hands into oversized scrub pockets, dropped her eyes when a doctor raised his voice. But her hands betrayed her, swift and sure. An IV line was always a single, fluid motion. Repositioning a patient, her grip was impossibly gentle, precise, as if she knew the exact tolerance of every joint. She knew. She had spent 18 years perfecting controlled visibility, first in the crucible of military special operations, where being unseen was life, and now in civilian life, where it was peace, or something close enough to pass for it. The familiar low hum of machinery and the scent of antiseptic usually dominated the night. Tonight, a different, subtle metallic tang seemed to prick the air as Lena checked on Mrs. Henderson in room 304, then adjusted the pain medication for Corporal Reyes in 308. Reyes, a 26-year-old who had left his leg in a dusty, sun-baked ravine far away, still woke screaming. Lena would sit with him until the medication took hold, humming softly a Samoan hymn, Easu Lua Fatasi, Jesus, my companion. Her colleagues thought it a simple island song. It was a warrior's hymn, a melody of finding peace in an unforgiving world, sung by her father as he tattooed her pia, the traditional Samoan warrior's marks that covered her thighs from waist to knees, completely hidden beneath her scrubs. Nobody knew about the pia. Nobody knew about any of it. Her last stop before midnight was room 312. "Still awake, Sergeant Major Elias Thorne?" she'd whisper. "Can't sleep, hips on fire, and it's Elias." He was 63, a retired master sergeant, his body worn by decades of service, now betraying him with a 3rd failed hip implant. He was the angriest patient on the floor, and the only one who asked Lena questions about herself. She deflected, always. On Elias's nightstand, illuminated by the blue glow of his heart monitor, sat a framed photograph. She'd noticed it on her first night caring for him. 12 operators in full combat gear, standing on a tarmac. Whisper Cell 7-3. She knew every face. She was in the 2nd row, far left, sunglasses and a boonie hat obscuring her features, blending in. Elias Thorne had looked at that photo 10,000 times and never connected the broad-shouldered woman in it to his quiet night nurse. 7 years tomorrow, Elias murmured, his voice catching. Since Kale. Lena's hand, adjusting his IV line, froze for a fraction of a second, then continued, smooth, professional, invisible. 7 years. 7 years since you bled out in that drainage ditch, Cale. 7 years since I knelt over you, pleading in Samoan because English failed me, until your heart stopped for the last time. His last words, still a knife twisting in her gut. Tell my old man I didn't waste it, Doc. Tell him I didn't waste any of it. And now, his old man slept 20 feet away, unaware. She pressed her back against the hallway wall, her right hand instinctively finding the smooth metal disc in her pocket. A Whispercell 7-3 challenge coin. She squeezed it until the raised Special Operations crest bit into her palm. Around her neck, beneath the scrubs, hung a dog tag, filed smooth, name erased. She didn't need to read it. She knew whose it was. Cale Thorne. The freckle-faced kid from New Hampshire who called her Doc and Uso. The one Samoan word he'd learned. The man she'd held for 47 minutes while rounds impacted 30 meters away, performing a field thoracotomy with a headlamp and a scalpel until his heart stopped. But what Lena didn't know, what nobody on the 3rd floor knew, was that Elias Thorne wasn't just another patient. He was a federal witness. His 3rd failed implant, like 22 others in 18 months across this facility alone, was no accident. The national average was 2 or 3. Lena had quietly flagged it, a written incident report placed on Eleanor Vance's desk, cross-referenced data attached. Noticed unusual implant failure rate, ST. Eleanor, sensing the implications, shut her down. These are VA patients, sweetie. Bad diets, bad habits. A few extra failures isn't a conspiracy. Stay in your lane. Eleanor had seen the numbers too, knew the pattern. But she was 4 years from retirement, unwilling to burn down her career over a hunch. What neither of them knew was that the implants were more than defective. They were counterfeit, manufactured overseas, relabeled by Praetorian Medical Corp and sold to the VA. The man behind it, Victor Sterling, Vice President of Government Contracts, golf-tanned and immaculate, had dismissed quality concerns with a cold shrug. These guys are already broken. Who's going to notice one more bad knee? Elias Thorne had noticed. 3 failed implants had a way of focusing the mind. He'd been talking to other veterans, comparing dates, serial numbers, failure timelines. For 4 months, he'd provided testimony and records for an FBI investigation. A folder of documents lay in his bedside drawer next to the photo of Whispercell 7-3 and a worn rosary. He told no one but the FBI agent who visited during the day shift. Victor Sterling learned of the grand jury and of Elias, his key witness in room 312. Over a bourbon, Sterling made a call. "I need a problem resolved," he said. "Sentinel Peaks, discreet, tonight." On the other end, a man named Ranger Cole, a former Army Ranger with a combat record that should have opened doors, but instead led to progressively darker rooms, wrote down a room number. At 1:45 a.m., Ranger Cole and his 3-man team entered Sentinel Peaks through a service entrance, a cloned badge their key. Black tactical gear, suppressed pistols, and the coordinated efficiency of men who'd done this before. Never at a VA hospital. Never against veterans. Cole tried not to think about that part. Their objective, room 312. Retrieve or destroy Elias Thorne's documentation. Convince him to recant. Necessary force was authorized. Cole knew what that meant, and Lena Tawa, holding Cale's challenge coin, did not know. Elias Thorne, sleeping soundly, did not know. They were unaware of the rising tide of violence about to crash upon their quiet ward. The camera slowly focuses on Elias Thorne's nightstand photo. its blue glow catching the faces of Whisper Cell 7-3. Lena, Shadow, is in it, unseen by him. But her hidden past is about to collide with his present. Victor Sterling, Vice President of Government Contracts for Praetorian Medical Corps, adjusted the silk tie beneath his silver-templed, golf-tanned face. He was a man who understood the mechanics of the market as intimately as a surgeon understood a scalpel, and just as dispassionately. Praetorian Medical Corps was a mid-tier defense contractor, pulling in hundreds of millions annually, a significant portion flowing from exclusive VA contracts. But the true profit wasn't in innovation. It was in deception. Overseas factories churned out orthopedic implants at 1/10 of the cost. These were then relabeled, certified as FDA-approved American-made devices. The hip replacements cracking inside veterans' bodies, the knee joints grinding bone against substandard metal, the spinal fusion hardware that sometimes simply shattered. They were all fakes. Products that should never have been inside a human being. Sterling, who had served in Army logistics during a conflict where he never heard a shot fired in anger, wore his veteran status like a campaign medal. A flag pin on his lapel, calling everyone brother at VA fundraising galas, shaking hands with the same veterans whose bodies were being poisoned by his products. He'd once told a nervous quality control manager, "These guys are already broken. Who's going to notice one more bad knee?" The manager had noticed. So had a few others. And then they stopped noticing. The mortgage payments, the car notes, the fear of unemployment, these things had a way of blunting one's moral compass. Sterling had mastered the art of leveraging plausible deniability, of crafting a narrative where the suffering was always someone else's fault. Sergeant Major Elias Thorne had been a thorn in Sterling's side for months. 3 failed implants had indeed focused Elias's mind with an unforgiving clarity. He'd begun comparing notes with other patients, meticulously tracking surgical dates, implant serial numbers, and timelines of catastrophic failure. He'd found 11 other veterans at Sentinel Peaks alone, all suffering from Praetorian implants gone wrong. Elias, a man whose life had been dedicated to service and truth, found himself unwillingly thrust into the role of a whistleblower. For 4 months, he had been quietly providing testimony and records to a tenacious FBI agent. In his bedside drawer, next to the framed photograph of Whisper Cell 7-3 and a worn rosary, lay a folder bulging with evidence, a silent, ticking time bomb for Praetorian Medical. He had not shared this secret with his night nurse. He had not shared it with anyone but the agent who visited discreetly during the day when Lena Tawa was not on duty. The walls of corruption, however, have their own kind of porosity. Victor Sterling found out about the impending federal grand jury the way men of his ilk always do, through a contact, a compromised official in the VA Regional Procurement Office in Washington. The same man who, for years, had been steering sole source contracts to Praetorian, made the call. The key witness, he reported, was a retired master sergeant at Sentinel Peaks Medical Center, room 312. Sterling considered his options over a single malt bourbon at the Hermitage Hotel bar. He had a wife in McLean, Virginia, a lake house in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a stock portfolio that would crater into oblivion if Praetorian's fraud became public. He thought about the 340 veterans across 11 hospitals who had been implanted with his company's counterfeits. He thought about it for precisely as long as it took him to finish his drink. Then he made a phone call. His voice, calm and controlled, sliced through the quiet hum of the bar. "I need a problem resolved," he said. "Sentinel Peaks. Discreet. Tonight." He paused, listening to the response. "Yes, ensure the witness becomes unreliable." On the other end of the line, a man known only as Ranger Cole jotted down the room number. Cole was 38, and he'd been falling for 6 years. A former Army Ranger, 75th Ranger Regiment, 8 years of service, a combat record that should have opened doors to legitimate, honorable careers. Instead, the doors he found after discharge led to progressively darker rooms. Embassy security in Baghdad, legitimate. Corporate protection in Erbil, mostly legitimate. And then the calls started coming. From people who needed problems solved without paperwork, without oversight, without the kind of accountability that comes with wearing a flag on your shoulder. Cole now ran a 4-man team, all former military. All men who had served their country and then discovered that their country's gratitude had an expiration date. They performed discreet problem resolution for clients who paid exclusively in untraceable cash, and who often requested body camera footage as proof of completion. Cole wasn't a thug. That was the problem. He was professional, controlled, precise. A soldier who had simply pointed his formidable training in a direction that paid significantly better than the VA disability checks that never quite covered the rent. He moved like he was still in the stack, using hand signals, planning operations the way he'd been taught at Fort Benning, with contingencies, rally points, and abort criteria. He was what Lena Tawa could have become, a dark mirror, reflecting the grim reality of a warrior adrift, repurposed for profit. At 1:45 a.m. on Thursday night, Cole and his 3-man team, Thorne, Weaver, and Griggs, entered the Sentinel Peaks Medical Center through a service entrance on the building's east side. A cloned maintenance badge, acquired for a substantial sum from a disgruntled facilities employee, granted them silent passage. They wore black tactical gear, carried suppressed Sig Sauer P320s, and moved with the coordinated, almost fluid efficiency of men who had executed such operations countless times. Never at a VA hospital. Never against veterans. Cole pushed that thought to the back of his mind. Their objective was clear, surgically precise. Access Room 312, retrieve or destroy Elias Thorne's documentation, and, crucial to Sterling's instructions, convince him to recant his FBI testimony. They were authorized to use necessary force. Cole understood what that meant. He also understood that Sterling hadn't explicitly ordered anyone killed. Plausible deniability, the currency of cowards. The air in the service corridor tasted stale, metallic, like old pennies. The only sound was the almost silent padding of their boots on the linoleum, each man a shadow moving within the deeper shadows. At 2:14 a.m., Thorne, Cole's communications specialist, cut the main power to Building C from the junction box in the basement. The lights died, floor by floor, not with a sudden snap, but a rapid cascade of diminishing glows, plunging the building into an unnerving blackness. Emergency generators kicked in a full 4 seconds later, bathing the hallways in a dim, spectral red light. Up on the 3rd floor, the skeleton night crew experienced those 4 seconds differently, each in their own isolated bubble of dread. Marcus Jefferson, the 24-year-old nursing assistant, only 3 weeks into his first hospital job, felt his stomach drop at the nurses' station. The crimson emergency lighting made the hallway look like a scene from a horror film. He seriously questioned whether $12 an hour was worth this. Eleanor Vance, the charge nurse, was in the medication room, meticulously counting narcotics for the shift log. She looked up at the sudden crimson wash, muttered a profanity under her breath. Power failures at the VA meant paperwork. Paperwork meant staying late. Darius Webb, the security guard, Marcus, the watchman, Thorne, was 1 floor down in the lobby. He felt the lights go out, and his hand instinctively went to the radio on his belt. Power failures happened, yes, but something about the timing. 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday, the quietest hour of the quietest shift, sent a prickle up his forearms, a primal alarm bell. And Lena Tawa was in room 312, adjusting Elias Thorne's multi-drip IV when the darkness descended. 4 seconds. That was how long it took. In those 4 seconds, Lena Tawa's body did something it hadn't done in 4 years. It went still. Not the stillness of fear, but the deep, resonant stillness of calibration. Her breathing dropped to a slow, controlled 8 cycles per minute. Her vision adjusted, adapting to the sudden void. Her hands, which had been trembling ever so slightly, a fine motor symptom she attributed to stress, but her body knew as 18 years of hypervigilance, became perfectly, absolutely steady. The timid night nurse, who apologized too much, who whispered, who brought panikeke, who let charge nurses call her sweetie. That woman folded into herself like a stage set being struck. What replaced her was something older, harder, and infinitely more dangerous than anything that had walked the halls of Sentinel Peaks Medical Center in its 50-year history. The emergency generators kicked in. Red light washed through room 312, painting the sleeping Elias Thorne in shades of crimson and shadow. On his nightstand, the Whisper Cell 7-3 team photo caught the dim glow, 12 faces in amber shadow. Lena heard it then, the stairwell door opening. Most people wouldn't have noticed it over the generator hum, a subtle metallic click followed by the whisper of hydraulic hinges. But Lena had spent 18 years listening for doors opening in the dark. In caves in Kunar province, in compounds in Helmand, in safe houses in Aleppo, where the wrong door opening at the wrong time meant everyone in the room was going to die. She counted the footsteps. 4 sets, tactical cadence, heel, toe, measured spacing, the deliberate rhythm of men trained to move as a unit. Not hospital staff, not maintenance workers, not security operators. Her gaze swept across the sleeping Elias Thorne, mouth open, one hand draped over the edge of the bed. Her eyes flicked to the Whisper Cell 7-3 photo on his nightstand. Cale's face grinned at her from 7 years ago, freckled and sunburnt and alive. She looked at the door, and Lena Tawa, who had spent 4 years trying to be invisible, made a decision that would make that impossible forever. But her hidden past is about to collide with his present. Lena Tawa stepped into the hallway. The red emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows, turning familiar corridors into something alien and menacing. Marcus Jefferson, the young nursing assistant, stood frozen behind the nurse's station, one hand on the phone, the other gripping the counter so hard his knuckles had gone white. He could hear it now, too. The methodical, precise cadence of multiple footsteps in the stairwell. Not random, not panicked, but measured. Intent. This was not a normal night at Sentinel Peaks. He didn't see Lena coming until she was directly in front of him. Her grip on his shoulders was not gentle, it was iron. Her eyes, Marcus would later tell his mother, were different. It was like looking at a completely new person. Same face, same scrubs, the same woman who'd patiently shown him how to change a wound dressing on his first day. But her eyes had gone flat and focused, a gaze so intense it made every hair on his body stand up. She spoke in a voice he'd never heard from her, low, clear, commanding. No trace of the usual whisper. "Marcus, look at me. There are armed men in this building. I need you to move every ambulatory patient into rooms 318 and 320. Lock the doors. Push the beds against them. Do it now. Go." Marcus went. He didn't question it. He didn't ask how she knew.
Something in her voice, an authority so absolute it bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the part of his brain that understood chain of command, made questioning impossible. He ran, a sudden burst of adrenaline propelling him down the hallway. Just then, Eleanor Vance, the charge nurse, appeared from the medication room, her face slack with confusion. She'd heard Lena's voice, that voice, and it had pulled her into the corridor like a hook. Lena turned to her, her posture now rigid, shoulders back. "Eleanor, call 911. Tell them armed intruders, Building C, 3rd floor. 4 hostiles, military trained. Then lock yourself in the break room." Eleanor stared. In 3 years, she had never heard Lena speak above a whisper. In 3 years, she had never seen Lena stand at her full height.
The woman in front of her was 2 inches taller than Eleanor remembered, her presence filling the corridor in a way that should have been obvious all along. "Who the hell are you?" Eleanor breathed, the question raw, but Lena offered no answer. "Eleanor, go." Eleanor went. Then Lena was alone in the corridor. The footsteps in the stairwell were getting closer, the subtle metallic whisper of the door growing more distinct. She had precisely 11 minutes until the Metro Police arrived. She knew Sentinel Peak's response times the way she knew everything about her operating environment. Green Berets didn't just occupy space, they owned it. She had no weapon, no backup. 14 veterans on this floor were counting on her, without even knowing it. This was Green Beret doctrine. Not SEAL direct action, not Ranger shock and awe. This was unconventional warfare, the art of doing everything with nothing, the art of turning a hospital into a fortress. Her movements were fluid, economical, driven by a cold, calculating urgency. She ripped 3 industrial-sized hand sanitizer dispensers from the walls, their contents, alcohol gel, quickly becoming her first improvised barrier. She squeezed the viscous liquid across the tile floor at the 2 choke points in the L-shaped corridor. Slippery, invisible barriers designed to disrupt a tactical advance. An almost silent glint of moisture on the linoleum, catching the low red light. What would you do in this silence, knowing men were coming for blood? Next, she pulled the heavy fire extinguisher from its wall bracket. 20 pounds of pressurized CO2. In a dark hallway, against men likely wearing night observation devices, a blast of white fog would blind both their optics and the operators simultaneously. A temporary, but crucial sensory overload. She repositioned a heavy medication cart, 300 pounds of locked steel drawers on wheels, into the narrowest point of the corridor. It created a bottleneck, forcing any intruders to move single file, reducing their numerical advantage. Then, from the nearby supply room, she disconnected an IV pole from its base. 6 feet of aluminum tubing with a weighted base, a staff, a weapon. In Afghanistan, she had once neutralized an insurgent with a tent pole. This was better. Then she did the thing that would have made her instructors at Fort Bragg proud. She opened the utility closet, found the breaker panel, and with a decisive click, killed the emergency lights on the 3rd floor. The corridor plunged into absolute blackness. The sudden void tasted thick, heavy, of ozone. The intruders had night observation devices, yes. She didn't. But she had worked this floor for 3 years. She knew every corner, every door, every squeaky tile, every supply closet, every connecting corridor, every blind spot. In Afghanistan, she had operated in caves where the darkness was so absolute you could press your fingers to your eyes and see no difference. Darkness isn't the enemy, she reminded herself, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones like an old friend arriving unannounced. Darkness is where Green Berets live. She positioned herself behind the doorframe of room 310, 2 doors down from Elias Thorne's room, and waited. The IV pole rested against her shoulder, its cold aluminum a familiar weight. Her breathing was slow, deep, controlled. Her hands were perfectly steady. The approaching footsteps echoed, amplified by the sudden, profound silence, growing closer, more defined, heavy, deliberate, drawing near. The metallic click of tactical boots on tile, the rhythmic beat of impending violence. The first intruder, Cole's point man, Thorne, hit the hand sanitizer slick at the corridor junction. His tactical boot lost purchase on the tile. It wasn't a dramatic fall, just a half-second of disrupted balance. A single, stumbling step that shifted his weight forward, pulling his suppressed SIG P320 off target. A half-second. A half-second was more than enough. Lena came from behind the doorframe like a current through dark water. The IV pole struck Thorne's weapon hand, a clean lateral strike to the wrist, precise as a surgical incision. The suppressed P320 skittered across the wet floor, disappearing with a faint clink under the medication cart. Before his nervous system could fully register the searing pain in his wrist, her knee drove into his solar plexus. The controlled force was exact, calibrated. She knew precisely how much pressure it took to empty a diaphragm. He folded, a gasp tearing from his lungs. She caught him before he hit the floor, not out of kindness, but because a body hitting tile makes noise. She lowered him down. Zip ties, pilfered earlier from the supply closet, secured his wrists behind his back, then his ankles. Medical tape, ripped from a roll, covered his mouth. 7 seconds. She melted back into the deeper darkness, her breath a silent exhalation. The second intruder, Weaver, came around the corner 30 seconds later, moving faster now, his senses heightened, aware that his point man had gone silent. His night observation device painted the hallway in a sickly green-gray phosphor. He saw the medication cart. He saw the wet sheen on the floor. He didn't see Lena. Because she was in the room to his left, behind the door, holding the fire extinguisher. The CO2 blast hit him square in the face. A thunderclap of white fog erupted, overloading his NODs with a blinding flare and simultaneously filling his lungs with freezing, choking gas. He tore at his goggles, gasping, disoriented, momentarily blinded. Lena stepped forward. A rear chokehold, not a dramatic, cinematic strangulation, but a precise vascular constriction, compressing both carotid arteries simultaneously. He was unconscious in 8 seconds. She lowered him to the floor, zip-tied him the same way. "You are not a warrior," her instructor at Fort Bragg had told her class 17 years ago. "You are a surgeon of violence. Cut only what needs cutting." She was cutting, but the first two had been the easy ones, lone operators separated from their team leader. What came next was different. Trent Cole had heard the silence. In tactical operations, silence was louder than gunfire. His point man hadn't reported. His second operator hadn't reported. That meant one of two things: a communications failure, or someone on this floor was systematically taking his team apart. He and his remaining operator, Griggs, a former Marine, had pulled back to the east corridor, regrouping in the red glow of an emergency exit sign. Cole's mind worked with brutal efficiency. A hospital floor, night shift, skeleton crew. Who on a skeleton crew could silently neutralize 2 trained operators in a dark hallway? The answer, he realized with a cold prickle, was no one. Unless the person wasn't what they appeared to be. "We've got a player on this floor," Cole said quietly to Griggs, his voice a low rumble. "Not a civilian, not hospital security. Someone with real training." They advanced together, back to back, covering every angle, every shadow, just as they'd been taught. This was different from the first two. These were men who expected resistance now. Men who were scanning every shadow and doorframe, every potential ambush point. But Lena wasn't in the shadows anymore. She'd moved through the supply room that connected to the parallel corridor, a route she knew intimately because she stocked those shelves every Thursday night. She came up behind them, through a door they didn't know existed. Could you turn an ordinary place into a battlefield with nothing but your wits and an intimate knowledge of the dark? Cole and Griggs moved with a predatory caution, their suppressed weapons scanning the green-gray phosphor of their night vision. Every shadow, every doorframe, every potential ambush point was meticulously assessed. The air, thick with the faint scent of antiseptic and something metallic, thrummed with unspoken tension. They expected a trained adversary now, one who knew the terrain. But Lena wasn't in the obvious shadows anymore. She had anticipated their retreat, their regrouping. She'd already moved, a silent current through the deep, intimate knowledge of her operational environment. She melted through the supply room, a narrow, cluttered space that connected to a parallel corridor. She knew this route, had stocked these shelves every Thursday night, her hands familiar with every box, every bin, every hidden crevice. The door she emerged from was one they didn't know existed, a nondescript service entrance designed for logistical convenience, not tactical ingress. It brought her up directly behind them. Griggs was the one closest, his back to her, weapon held high, covering their 6 o'clock. Lena struck. Her hands moved in a blur, a precise, devastating dance. The same vascular constriction, compressing the carotid arteries on both sides. Not a struggle, but a sudden, overwhelming pressure that stole the world. He went down heavy. 220 pounds of former Marine collapsing into her arms. She lowered him as quietly as she could, her muscles straining. But on the way down, his heavy frame grazed a metal supply cart. The rattle of metal echoed, sharp and jarring, through the profound silence of the corridor. Cole spun. The metallic clang had been his alarm. He was alone now. 3 men down. His night vision devices painted the scene in an eerie green. Griggs on the floor, still, and standing 12 feet away in the red glow of the stairwell exit sign was a woman. In nurse's scrubs, holding an IV pole like a bow staff. The air crackled, suddenly charged. Cole's breath hitched in his throat. What happens when a soldier's deadliest weapon isn't a gun, but their mind and a hospital floor? He aimed his weapon, the suppressed Sig Sauer P320, now steady in his hands. The woman didn't flinch. She didn't raise her hands in surrender. She stood in a stance that Trent Cole recognized with a jolt that went deeper than fear. It was the recognition a predator feels when it encounters another of its kind. Weight-centered, knees soft, angles calculated, every line of her body expressing a readiness so calm, so absolute, it was more terrifying than aggression. Her eyes, even in the dim red light, held no panic, no hesitation. They were flat, focused, and utterly devoid of anything but intent. "You're soft," Cole said, his voice a low, rough rumble. Not a question, but a statement of calculated assessment, a challenge. He watched for a reaction, any flicker of doubt, any sign of the timid night nurse facade. There was none. The woman in the scrubs said one word, Pashto. Shatab. Stop. The language of Afghan commandos. The language of people who understand precisely what happens next if you don't stop. The language of a woman who had trained 200 of the most dangerous fighters in Central Asia, and spoke their tongue the way she spoke her own. Trent Cole had been a ranger. He'd worked alongside special forces teams in Afghanistan. He'd heard that accent before, the precise Nangarhar dialect, spoken by someone who had lived it, not merely learned it from a textbook. He knew what he was looking at. He recognized the bone-deep competence, the unyielding will, the silent ferocity that marked a true warrior. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. He put his weapon on the floor, not because of fear, but because of recognition. Because the woman standing in front of him was what he had been before he started falling. Before the money, before the dark rooms, before the compromised operations. And in the red light of that corridor, looking at the absolute stillness of her eyes, Trent Cole understood for the first time exactly how far he'd fallen. He sank against the wall, his hands slowly rising, empty, in surrender. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the hum of the emergency generators and the steady, measured breathing of Lena Tawa. Could you imagine facing your own forgotten self, your lost integrity, in the eyes of an adversary? The police arrived 11 minutes after Eleanor Vance's desperate 911 call. What they found on the third floor of Building C was a scene that would take investigators 3 days to fully reconstruct. 4 intruders subdued, 2 zip-tied with medical supply restraints, 1 unconscious, and 1, Trent Cole, sitting against the wall with his hands raised, an expression on his face that the first responding officer would later describe as a man who had just met God and realized he'd been praying to the wrong one. 0 patients harmed, 0 staff harmed. 1 night nurse standing in the corridor, holding an IV pole like a sentinel, breathing normally, as calm as if she'd just finished a routine vitals check. The first officer through the stairwell door was a former Marine. He took one look at Lena, her posture, her controlled breathing, the precise way she had arranged the scene, and said what Marcus the Watchman Thorne had been thinking for 3 years. "Ma'am, what branch?" Lena didn't answer, but Marcus was there. He'd come up from the lobby the moment he heard the commotion, moving faster than a man his age should have, his old army instincts pulling him up 3 flights before his knees caught up with the decision. He walked up behind Lena and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I knew it," he said quietly, his voice rough with triumph and a profound sense of vindication. "I knew the first week." The next 3 hours blurred into a cascade of flashing lights, radio chatter, and FBI agents arriving in dark sedans. Trent Cole's body camera, still recording throughout the entire assault, was seized as evidence. On that footage, 11 minutes that would end Victor Sterling's life as he knew it. The camera had captured everything, including the pre-operation briefing where Cole confirmed the target, the client's authorization, and the specific instruction to ensure the witness becomes unreliable. Cole cooperated immediately. He gave the arresting officer one statement before being read his rights. "Tell the nurse she's the real deal." Then he told the FBI everything. The phone call from Sterling, the payment, the cloned badge, the body cameras. All of it. As Cole was led away in handcuffs, later zip-tied to a gurney with 2 dislocated shoulders, he passed Lena in the corridor. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. They both knew what they were. The difference was what they'd chosen to do with it. By dawn, the third floor was quiet again. The patients who had been moved to the secure rooms were back in their beds. Marcus Jefferson, who had performed flawlessly during the crisis, despite being 24 and 3 weeks into his first hospital job, sat in the break room with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing, a silent tremor running through him. Eleanor Vance was in the charge nurse's office, also staring at nothing, but for different,
heavier reasons. Lena was in room 312. She hadn't left the floor. She'd refused to leave until every patient had been assessed, every vital checked, every IV line confirmed. The FBI wanted a full debriefing. Hospital administration wanted her in a conference room. She told them both the same thing. "My patients come first. I'll be available at shift change." Elias Thorne was awake now. His pain medication had worn off during the commotion, and he was furious. Not about the intruders, but about having slept through the entire event. "They tell me my nightmares turned into Rambo, and I was asleep." He slapped the bed rail. 26 years in the Army, and I missed the action because of a drip bag." Lena adjusted his pillow. "I just called 911, Sergeant Major."
"Right, and my hip works great." He shifted painfully, wincing. Then his expression changed. The anger drained away, replaced by something older, heavier. He reached for the framed photograph on his nightstand. "You know what today is?" She knew. March 7th. She'd known since midnight. 7 years, Elias said, his voice dropping to a register that had nothing to do with volume, and everything to do with grief. 7 years since my boy died. He held the photograph up, angling it toward the dawn light coming through the window. 12 operators in full kit. Whisper Cell 7-3. A lifetime ago. His team. Elias's thick finger traced across the faces. "They told me the team medic worked on Cale for 47 minutes before they called it." His voice cracked on the number. 47 minutes. I never got that medic's name. They said it was classified. He looked at Lena. She was perfectly still. Not the trained stillness of an operator preparing for action, but the stillness of a woman who had known this moment was coming for 3 years and had never once allowed herself to prepare for it. Elias looked at the photo. He looked at Lena. He looked at the photo again. Second row, far left. Sunglasses, boonie hat, broad shoulders, same jaw, same hands. "Oh my God," Elias whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The sound that came from Lena Tawa wasn't a sob. It was smaller than that. A single exhalation. A fracture in the wall she'd built around herself for 4 years. A tear tracked down her face. One tear. She didn't wipe it away. She nodded. Elias Thorne, 63 years old, retired master sergeant, 3 failed hip implants, a walker, and an IV line, and a hospital gown, lifted himself out of bed. It must have been agonizing. His face went white, his hands shook on the bed rail. But he stood, and he took 2 steps, and he wrapped his arms around the woman who had held his son for 47 minutes in a ditch in a place far away, and he wouldn't let go. 47 minutes, Elias said into her shoulder, his voice barely a whisper now. "You gave my boy 47 minutes. You gave him everything." During the embrace, Elias felt something press against his chest. He pulled back, looked at the necklace. Smooth silver, no text visible. But Elias Thorne had worn a dog tag for 26 years. He knew what one felt like. "Is that his?" Lena couldn't speak. She pulled the tag from beneath her scrubs and held it in her palm. Elias took it in his hands, ran his thumb over the smooth surface, the same motion Lena had made 10,000 times. He didn't need to read the name. He already knew. The sun rose over Timberline Valley, pouring golden light through the windows of room 312. And 2 people who had loved the same man held each other and wept without sound. Because soldiers don't cry loudly. They just cry. And somewhere on the nightstand, Cale Thorne's freckled grin watched them from behind the glass of a photograph, taken in a place neither of them would ever go back to, in a time neither of them would ever get back. The Praetorian Medical Corps case detonated across the country like a delayed fuse. Within 48 hours of Trent Cole's body camera footage reaching the FBI's Washington field office, search warrants were executed on Praetorian headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. Victor Sterling was arrested at his hotel, still wearing the flag pin, his golf tan going gray under fluorescent booking lights. Praetorian's stock crashed 72% in a single trading day. The CEO fired Sterling before lunch. The company faced $180 million in federal penalties and a class action lawsuit from 340 veterans across 11 VA hospitals who had been implanted with counterfeit hardware. Sterling's speeches at veteran charity events, the handshakes, the brother talk, the flag pin sincerity, all were replayed on cable news as evidence of a hypocrisy so complete it almost seemed like performance art. He was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. He cried at the sentencing hearing. The judge was unmoved. The Sentinel Peaks story broke locally. Night nurse stops armed intruders at VA hospital, and went national within hours when the military connection surfaced. Marcus the Watchman Thorne gave an interview to a local affiliate that was picked up by every major network. I watched that woman for 3 years. She moves like a ghost. I served 22 years in the Army. I know special operations when I see it. I just never said anything because it wasn't my secret to tell. Eleanor Vance walked into the hospital director's office 3 days after the assault and placed a folder on the desk. Inside, 18 months of quality assurance records she'd been tracking on her own, implant failure data, serial numbers, patterns she'd documented and then hidden because she was afraid. I knew something was wrong, Eleanor told the investigators. Lena told me. I called it normal. That's on me. Her testimony, combined with Elias Thorne's 4 months of FBI cooperation, became the backbone of the federal case. Eleanor found Lena in the break room the following week. She stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. I owe you more than an apology. I owe you the truth. I saw the implant numbers too. I was afraid. Lena looked at her. 3 years of sweetie and stay in your lane and she's fine for night shift. 3 years of being dismissed by a woman who'd seen the same broken veterans coming back for their 3rd and 4th surgeries and chosen to look away. I know, Lena said. It was enough. Not forgiveness, something harder and more real than that. Acknowledgement. The kind of truth-telling that doesn't need a hug. In the weeks that followed, the VA secretary called personally. A general from Army Special Operations Command offered to set the record straight about Lena's service record. Media outlets from Timberline Valley to New York wanted interviews. Lena declined everything. She told the hospital director, I didn't do this for cameras. I did it because there were people in those rooms who needed someone to stand between them and the dark. That's all I've ever done. But something had changed. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of change where the hero throws off their disguise and stands in the spotlight. Something quieter. Something true. Lena stopped whispering. She didn't become loud. She didn't become someone else. She simply stopped folding her voice into something small. When a resident botched a wound irrigation technique the following week, she stepped forward and said in a clear, steady, normal voice, Doctor, if you angle the catheter 15 degrees laterally, you'll irrigate the deepest pocket without disrupting the tissue bed. The resident blinked. The attending blinked. Lena didn't blink. She started teaching. No announcement, no program name at first, just a whiteboard and a supply closet, and her 18 years of keeping people alive in places where people weren't supposed to survive. Combat trauma response for VA nurses. how to pack a wound, how to manage a tension pneumothorax, how to stay calm when the lights go out. 12 nurses attended the first session. 40 attended the second. The hospital asked her to formalize it. She called it the USO protocol. USO, Samoan for sibling, because in Samoan culture, your USO is the person who stands beside you. Her nurses would stand beside their veteran patients. One morning, after a 12-hour shift, Lena changed in the locker room. Eleanor walked in. She stopped. Her eyes went to Lena's thighs, to the pia, the traditional Samoan warrior's tattoo, intricate black geometric patterns covering her skin from waist to knees. The most sacred mark a Samoan warrior could receive, hand-tapped by her father over 5 sessions across 3 weeks. The pain had been immeasurable. Lena hadn't made a sound. Eleanor stared. "My father gave it to me when I earned my Green Beret," Lena said simply. "In my family, warriors are marked so the community knows who will protect them." Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'm sorry I ever called you sweetie." 3 weeks after the assault, Elias asked Lena for a favor. He needed something from his apartment in Antioch, a small, sparse, practical place. On his dresser, a shadow box containing Cale's Green Beret, his Special Forces tab, the Whisper Cell team photo, and Cale's challenge coin, the coin of Whisper Cell 7-3. Elias gave it to Lena. "You already have one," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Now you have his. You earned both." Lena held the coin in her palm. She already carried one, her own Whisper Cell 7-3 challenge coin, the one she gripped during difficult moments, the one whose edges had bitten into her palm 1,000 times. Now she had two. 2 coins, 2 lives. Hers and Cale's. She would carry both from that day forward. Elias's recovery was slow but real. He received a proper implant from a reputable manufacturer under emergency VA authorization. Lena was his night nurse throughout, not because she was assigned to him, but because neither of them asked for a change. They didn't talk about the photo every night, but sometimes at 3 a.m., when the ward was quiet and the Timberline Valley sky was dark outside the windows, Elias would say something like, "Cale loved coconut. Did you know that?" And Lena would say, "I know. He used to steal the coconut cream from the PX before I could get to it." And they'd sit together in the quiet, 2 people who loved the same man, finding pieces of him in each other. The Sunday after the assault, Lena called her mother in Leone, American Samoa. 8,000 miles, a 13-hour time difference, a connection that had never been broken, only muffled. They talked about the village, about Lena's brothers, 2 Marines, 1 Army, all still serving in their own ways, about the weather, about the panikeke recipe, and whether Lena was using enough coconut cream. Then her mother said what she always said. "Lua, my warrior." And for the first time in 4 years, Lena didn't change the subject. "Io mama, I am the warrior." Her mother cried in Samoan, in the language of knowing your daughter had finally come home to herself. Lena sat in her small apartment afterward, looking at the one photograph on her wall. Her great-grandmother, the village chief who had organized her community's defense during the 1918 influenza epidemic and saved 200 lives through quarantine and traditional medicine. A different kind of warrior, the same lineage. On the bed beside her lay a woven ie toga, a fine Samoan mat she'd carried from American Samoa, the one item she'd brought from home. In her pocket, 2 challenge coins. Around her neck, a smooth dog tag. Olele ala leu olua. The path to authority is through service. She had served her country for 18 years. She served her patients now. She would serve her nurses through the USO protocol.
The form changed. The service didn't. Lena Tawa didn't write a book. She didn't do interviews. She didn't become a symbol or a spokesperson or a brand. She went back to work the next night and brought panikeke and checked vitals and hummed Easu Lua Fatasi at 3 a.m. But she hummed it louder now, loud enough for patients to hear. And when they asked what it was, she told them, "It's a Samoan hymn, a warrior's song about finding peace." And for the first time, the smile reached her eyes. Lena looks at the 2 challenge coins in her palm, feeling the cool metal, the weight of 2 lives, hers and Kale's. The path to authority is through service. The form changed. The service didn't. Some warriors don't pick up a weapon. They lay down a disguise.